a little bit of time. I'll spend a little bit of time as well talking about the needs, the mental health related needs of the community with which we work. We are not primarily mandated to support those needs. We operate sort of as an ambulance, if you will, as opposed to a hospital. But we're cognizant of those needs, definitely the queer community, and you'll hear me use the queer community interchangeably with the LGBTQI plus community, just as a cultural shorthand. But we're, as I was saying, we're cognizant of those mental health care needs. And so during our direct service delivery, and certainly as we kind of hand off our newcomers to partnering organizations, we try to stay aware, try to stay mindful of all that our beneficiaries have been through. They've been through a lot, as you'll hear me illustrate, and we try to support them throughout. So I am going to share my screen. I'll go through the presentation, and then if at the end there are any questions, I'm happy to entertain those as well. So give me 2 seconds here. All right. And let me know if you have trouble seeing this. All right, can everybody see that? I hope you can. Yep. Okay, good, thank you. I can't see you, so if you're nodding, I wouldn't know. So as I said, Rainbow Railroad, Canadian charity. We began in 2006, and we're mandated to assist the safe passage of at-risk LGBTQ people around the world. So by way of context, I wanted to talk first a little bit about the global landscape in which we work. So if we look around the world right now, we have roughly 69 countries that outlaw intimate relationships between persons of the same sex and or non-cisgender expressions. So on the one hand, there's a criminalization of same-sex activity, but also on the other hand, there's always been this sort of conflation of what it is to be gay with what it is to be trans. And I'm going to talk a little bit about I guess time permitting the difference, and perhaps we're already well versed in that. But then I just wanted to add the additional statistic that among those 69 countries that outlaw being gay or trans or non-binary, 11 of them punish same-sex activity with death. So again, this sort of odd conflation of identifying as a gay or lesbian with what it is to be trans, with what it is to actually engage in the inclinations that come with being that, and punishing those, acting on those inclinations with death. So we've seen this obsession for quite some time, but around the world, it's becoming increasingly codified and penalized. So this is just an example of some of the headlines we're seeing, just to offer an additional context. Right now, I'll talk a little bit more later about two of the hotspots in which we work, Uganda and Afghanistan. We would consider those crisis areas, along with other areas in the world like Chechnya, Syria. Jamaica is sort of a serial place out of which we receive a ton of requests for help. But what I'd like to impress upon people in the presentation is that we often have this notion that these sort of heinous things against certain communities happen in far off exotic parts of the world. But I will remind you that this year alone, we've seen, and we're only halfway through the year, we've already seen a record number of bills issued at the state level targeting the LGBTQI community, and in particular, the trans community. So the sort of vitriol and hatred that we see directed toward the queer community is pretty universal. And as I said, increasingly becoming codified or accepted, if not endorsed, by jurisdictions around the world. So a little bit about our work as well. So we work at the intersection of queer rights and refugee resettlements and asylum rights. So again, by way of context, I wanted to talk a little bit about the numbers we're seeing of displaced persons around the world. So right now, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that we are looking at approximately 110 million forcibly displaced people in the world. And they are that by way of, regional conflict, domestic violence, persecution, war, you name it. 110 million displaced persons is the highest number on record. And it's only going to grow, I think, when you look at sort of geopolitical trends around the world. To that number, we might want to add an additional 30 million, and these would be people who are forcibly displaced but unidentified. So a person might find themselves having left their country of origin or nativity because they don't want to be identified as a displaced person for whatever reason. If they happen to be queer, if they happen to be fleeing like a domestic violence situation, perhaps they don't want to call attention to themselves by sort of going through the proper paperwork or the proper scrutiny that comes with being named a displaced person. To that number, we want to add an additional 50 million people who are internally displaced. So these would be individuals who would flee where they live because of the conflicts that we talked about, the dangers that we talked about, but they have fled within their country of origin. We work with the entirety of this number in service to those who are displaced by way of some sort of violence or peril that related to their sexual orientation or gender expression. So it's a huge number, and it's certainly a number at which we can only be kind of a drop in the bucket. But we do what we do because, we hear the stories of the people and the things that they go through, and it keeps us motivated. So a little bit about who we are. I've said this a couple of times. International organization with a mission to assist lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex people escape state-enabled violence and persecution. So we're careful to say state-enabled, not state-sponsored. We don't only receive requests for help from those suffering a reaction to laws, right? In many countries around the world, homosexuality or, same-sex activity, gender expression, it's not mentioned explicitly in the books, if you will. But at the same time, the peril exists in that there is a culture of tolerance, of hostility towards queer people. I use the example of Jamaica, and not to beat up on that country. Here in Toronto, where I'm based, a great number of the people of color and sort of the Black community have Jamaican ancestry. And of the queer people I know in that subset, they talk about how robust and frontal this anti-queer, homophobic sort of culture is, pervasive across their country. And again, not by way of laws, but just by way of what it means to be from a country struggling with its own identity and certainly its own sexual identity in the wake of, recent liberation efforts, in the wake of reconciling what it is to reclaim traditional faith traditions, for example, vis-a-vis what they inherited about humanity and sexuality through sort of a Christianization of their cultures and that sort of thing. So really interesting context in which we work. I'll talk a little bit about hotspots around the world, but the antipathy toward the queer community and the reaction to it is definitely everywhere. So a little bit about our history. We began in 2006. And the story is, our organization started around a kitchen table by a couple individuals who had friends in parts of the world hostile toward the queer community, and they wanted to do something to help them. They were able to do their own private fundraising and sponsor the safe passage of a few people. But as they did outreach to people and told them what they were doing, we were trying to raise funds among their private networks, they saw quite the response to the plight of the people whom they were looking to help. And they understood that, they had the makings of a larger organization. In 2013, that organization became a registered charity in Canada. And then subsequently in the United States, received 501c3 status. Between 2014 and 16, major grants, some of the first foundational grants, enabled the organization to grow by way of establishing nonprofit status on both sides of the border, hiring new staff, and defining its core program areas, which I'll talk about a little bit later. In 2017, the organization responded to its first big crisis out of Chechnya, and they helped more than 60 Chechens escape persecution through our emergency travel assistance program. 2018 through 2020 saw some major evolutions in the organization. We helped 500 people travel to safe parts of the world. We had the capacity to respond to over 7,000 requests for assistance by way of our supporters and by way of an evolution of our program cycle. And I'll talk a little bit about the effects that COVID had on that. But yeah, 2018 through 2020 was a major era of change for our organization. And we're still seeing sort of the fallout, if you will, of that period. And I'll talk about that. In 2021, we assisted over 1,600 people in country and moved 206 people to safer communities and countries around the world. So, we came from very humble beginnings, but have really quickly grown and ramped up and continue to ramp up by way of new partnerships and service to at-risk queer people around the world. So a little bit about our core program areas. Our bread and butter has always been our emergency travel support program. And that is exactly as it sounds. We receive requests from help from people around the world. We triage those requests. We do research. We prioritize them based on urgency and specific needs. And for those that are the most urgent and there is no hope for finding networks and pathways to safety within a country, we will, to the extent possible, shuttle people out of the country. What was interesting, though, is that in 2020, when COVID hit and the pandemic set in, of course, we saw a number of limitations on travel, international travel. And yet our requests for help didn't stop. So we were forced in a way, and this is sort of the silver lining of the pandemic, if you will. We were forced in a way to creatively come up with new areas of programming to assist those requesting help. And so the subsequent 5 that you see here is what we came up with. These are supplemental programs. Emergency travel support still is our core program, but now in addition, we provide direct livelihood support. Sometimes people need money. Sometimes their most urgent need is to get out of a current living situation that is, threatening their life. And what they need is a little bit of money to pay rent for a couple months. We vet the cases request, and if that's what they need, we are able to resource them with that money. This is not a super long-term and much less a permanent sort of mode of assistance. But again, it's a response to a crisis situation that individuals are encountering. In addition to that, we provide partnership development. So we partner with a number of community, government, non-government organizations around the world who provide all sorts of things to the people with whom we work. And oftentimes these organizations are as startup and grassroots as we were in 2006. And what they need would be the financial support to support people locally. We can only do so much as a fairly small organization situated in Toronto and New York City. We have only a staff of 50, and we're responding to an entire world of requests. And a way that we can do that sort of more robustly is through development of partnerships and the support of those partners doing the work where they are. So to that, we also have an emergency response program. So I'll talk a little bit later about hotspot situations in regions of the world. Right now, those being Uganda, Afghanistan, and Ukraine since the Russian invasion. These sort of these hotspots, we often see crackdowns on the queer community. And these could be, mass arrests. These could be, again, sort of sort of government related. I like to use the word pogroms if I would borrow from Jewish history. Just these sort of campaigns of brutal violence in communities where queer people live. We respond to those in a very sort of agile, nimble way based on the particularities of a case. And we can very quickly move in and move people around countries, manipulate pathways of travel, and if necessary, get them out of those countries. We also offer non-monetary support. So in addition to a rental check or something like that, oftentimes, what people need, and this is certainly true of the trans community, is just, networks and information about resources that reside where they are. Through our non-monetary support program, we can connect people with healthcare services, legal supports, that sort of thing. And our newest program, and we're very excited about this, is a private sponsorship for refugees program, or PSR program. And through this program, we were able to supplement sort of refugee referrals to government with private sponsors. So these would be individual families, faith communities, companies, small institutions that on a private basis want to bring over particular individuals and then also subsequently support them in their area of landing. So right now we support all 6 of these areas, and we find the suite to be, it allows us to sort of more comprehensively serve the needs of those at risk. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our growth and the number of people we've helped over the years. So in 2018, we were able to help. Now, mind you, 2018, we were only doing emergency travel assistance. We were able to help some 196 people. You'll see that ramp up to 204. And then 503 in 2020. And then by 2021, you'll see it grow tremendously. And the reason you see that sort of that huge growth is because by 2021, we had developed the additional programming areas. And through those supplemental programming areas, we were able to help a much larger group of people who, in fact, did need the emergency travel. So 2021, through all of our program areas, we were able to help over 1,800 people. And then in 2022, literally off the charts here, we were able to help roughly 4,500 people in 2022. And we're proud of those numbers sort of objectively. But also when we compare the numbers with the numbers that we had targeted for each year by way of our strat plan, we were punching above our weight. Like, we were clearly helping numbers over these years much higher than we had anticipated. And it's an area in which we're proud, and it's an area in which we, around which we constantly thank our supporters for making that possible. But as impressive as those numbers are, when you compare them with the numbers of people requesting help around the world, again, it becomes immediately true that we are just a drop in the bucket. So in 2017, we got 1,200 requests, and you'll see this number ramp up over the years to over 7,000 requests in 2021, and in last year, over 10,000 requests. Given the geopolitical developments across the world, again, out of places, including Afghanistan, but not exclusively, Afghanistan, Uganda, Syria, Chechnya, Ukraine, and Russia, and increasingly, strangely, out of the United States, we have already received over 8,000 requests for help this year. We're going to blow that 10,000 number out of the water, and it's not something that we celebrate. I wanted to talk a little bit now. Actually, let me slow down. Are there any questions to this point? And if not, I'll fly through, and then I'll ask all the questions at the end of the presentation.
So far, I'm keeping my questions in writing, so I can save them till the end for you.
Okay, very good. I will fly through this. So hotspot number 1 for us is Afghanistan. So I won't give you an extended history lesson, but the long and short of it is, May 2021, you saw the Allied forces that had occupied the country for the sort of 15 years prior suddenly leave the country. The United States, I think, was the last to leave in May 2021. And by August of the same year, the Taliban had taken over control there for, I think at that point, it was the 3rd time that country saw a Taliban take over, and quickly instituted the strictest Sharia law possible. So I want to talk very quickly. I wanted to make the mention about Sharia law. Oftentimes, when we speak of legalities and modes of living that aren't our own, and here I'm speaking specifically about sort of Islamic law, we can have this notion of a very sort of single-minded, monolithic way of being. Sharia law simply means Islamic law, right? I hear a lot of media organizations and a lot of the word escapes me. Critics of sort of Islamist law use Sharia as a sort of catch-all to mean sort of this oppressive, overriding sort of way of being. And in fact, it just means sort of faith-informed law. And in some expressions of that, it can be actually quite progressive in the way that we see, except recently, out of places like Turkey, right? On the other hand, or Morocco, right? On the other hand, it can be quite strict, like the expressions of law that we see out of places like Pakistan, and in this case, Afghanistan. And under the Taliban's interpretation of Sharia law, same-sex activity is made punishable by death. And I won't read the quote over to the right, but this is just a prescription that you hear from one Taliban judge to a German paper in 2021. Anyway, since the Taliban takeover, we've seen an increase in requests for help. We've seen over 5,500 people request help, and they report all sorts of things to us: increased surveillance, corrective rapes, public killings, communities and even families turning in loved ones suspected of being gay. We see this not only out of Afghanistan, but definitely we've seen an uptick of it since the Taliban takeover. So far in response to this all, we've been able to move some 300 people out of Afghanistan. On all of our Afghanistans, we resettle in Canada because they can't get visitor visas to the United States, basically. And in cooperation with the Canadian government, we announced just in December an agreement to move another 600 plus Afghan citizens to Canada. We'd like to do that by the end of the year. That's a very tall order. Very likely it'll be something probably better realizing through the balance of like 2024. And we continue to monitor the humanitarian response on the ground in Kabul and to remain flexible to the needs as they come up in Afghanistan. So the second hotspot is out of Uganda. If you've been watching the news, you might know that in March 2023, an anti-homosexuality bill was tabled. It was drafted in support of what they called support of the traditional family in Uganda. It was an extension of the existing anti-homosexuality law in 2014, which already made same-sex activity illegal and punishable by cash penalty or prison time. But suddenly it called for a number of other things, now making, in some cases, same-sex activity or aggravated sexuality, they'll call it, punishable by death for the first time. So the problem with laws like this is some of these provisions seem entirely reasonable. The outlawing, for example, of life in prison, the call for life in prison for persons convicted of grooming, and in this case, it would be children, minors, for sexual activity, homosexual activity. The problem with laws that sound reasonable on paper is that they're subject to very broad interpretation when they're left quite vague. And the drafting of this law is very vague. And so that provision would be applicable to a situation where, for example, you have two consenting minors who want to engage in consenting, loving same-sex activity. They would be subject to this law and the application of it. Another sort of odd application would be the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality. So this would be sexual contact between minors, people deemed vulnerable or in cases where a non-curable infection is transmitted. So here you have criminalized the you've criminalized same-sex activity between persons who might be HIV positive. And a huge percentage, not only of Ugandans, but Africans across the border, coming out of the past 20, 25 years and the ill response to HIV, identify as HIV positive. What this provision does is take away their agency, as does it take away the agency of, let's say, a mentally disabled person who wants to engage same-sex activity. They would be deemed disabled or vulnerable under this provision of the law. But then you have other provisions that are just flat out directly targeting the queer community. The prosecution and imprisonment of queer rights activists, for example. A number of individual human rights defenders have been reported surveillance by law enforcement, targeting by community members, that sort of thing. And now suddenly this law makes the work that they do not only sort of unwanted, but illegal and punishable by prison time. Risk of jail time to property owners on whose property same-sex activity happens. So if an LGBTQI person is a tenant of a development and they are prosecuted for activity, their landlord could be prosecuted for providing a space wherein they could engage in their debauchery. And also the prosecution and imprisonment for the first time of media groups, journalists, publishers, and the suggestion is even educational institutions who are deemed to promote homosexuality. So, if there are newspapers, and there are, or clinics, or private practicing, healthcare providers who are administering care to trans people, for example, suddenly this makes their situation and their livelihood very much precarious. President Museveni signed this bill into law in May 2023, despite the pressure of international governments and human rights organizations. And so right now, the situation becomes one wherein we are monitoring the situation. We are fielding requests out of Uganda. And that last bullet there suggests that, in the space since March 1, I think that says, we've received the number of requests out of Uganda that we would receive in over a 6-month period. We continue to monitor those situations, respond to requests for help, and to pressure elected officials to themselves pressure the Ugandan government. Wanted to quickly talk a little bit about the request for help, and I won't go into great detail here, but you will see that cis males, gay men, they represent the largest percentage of people. And actually, this says specifically Uganda, but this stat is true. And generally the math of all people requesting help from around the world. So cisgender and gay men represent the largest group of people requesting help. But then the transgender community, regardless of their sexual orientation, represent the second largest percentage of people, and that's male to female or female to male requesting help. So real quick, I think what we all know is true is that the LGBTQI plus community experiences unique mental health health-related challenges. And I just wanted to call some of these out. So we see the Stonewall Foundation out of the UK. They published a report in 2018 suggesting that 70% of non-binary people had experienced depression. We see 71% of trans people, and here they're including 79% of non-binary people had experienced anxiety. And you see numbers attached as well to the occurrence of eating disorders, suicidal ideations, and attempts of suicide. And those numbers are daunting, right? And I just wanted to give those by way of sort of objectively what the queer community and the gender variant community experience. But then also, in a more subjective way, you see that the queer community, deals with high propensities of a number of things. So by way of that second statistic there, heterosexual respondents had the lowest rate of depression, suicidal ideation, followed by gay and lesbian respondents, bisexual respondents, and transgender respondents who over 30% of whom had contemplated suicide. And that's according to a 2011 study by the National Center for Transgender Equality and National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. That same organization published another study, the National Transgender Discrimination Study, which suggests that 41% of trans people reported having attempted suicide, and that compares to roughly 1.6 people in the United States. So we see that both by way of sort of, relative to the broader community, but definitely in and of themselves, members of the queer community deal with a litany of mental health care related problems. And some of those, if we want to sort of run through them, are the same problems that everybody deals with, right? Especially young people coming of age and trying to define themselves, lack of support from friends and family, feelings of isolation, societal and cultural discrimination. But then they also, of course, deal with things specific to the queer community, gender identity and gender expression related challenges at school or work, not being this sort of notion of what a man or a woman should be. And if you happen to be trans, in addition, you deal with things like financial insecurity from not being able to find work, insurance concerns if you are transitioning in some stage of transition, and having to deal with insurance providers and healthcare providers, and navigating that world is an incredible source of stress. If you are undergoing hormone related therapy, dealing with health concerns that come out of that, transphobia broadly. And I will just quickly say, many of you might be fans or perhaps critics of the comedian Dave Chappelle, and he got himself into a lot of trouble with the queer community in the last little while. And one of his jokes had to do with members of the queer community, or individuals who represent members of the queer community, taking a car trip together. He says that behind the driver's wheel, you have the sort of cis gay man, right? He's the leader. In the passenger seat, you have the sort of cis lesbian woman, right? She's in the passenger seat because she's got a certain degree of self-empowerment. She's there in the front seat. But the cis gay male just won't let her drive, right? But in the back, you have the trans person because nobody listens to the trans person, kind of thing. And Dave Chappelle received a lot of criticism for that. And there was certainly more sort of nuance to the way he told the joke. And I actually do think it was in some ways mean-spirited. But I say this as a member of the queer community, there's some truth to that joke. There's a disparity among the alphabet soup of the LGBTQI plus community. There's certainly stratification, and trans people, they deal with transphobia not only from the straight cis community, but incredible amounts of transphobia from other members of the queer community. It's a discussion that's perennial and internal, but one that's very important, and one that trans people have to kind of contend with. And then, of course, their own challenge, relevant to if they've been diagnosed with a sort of the dysphoric sort of issue around gender and gender expression. So, to get at these needs, what I will say, I will back up very quickly and mention again that Rainbow Railroad, we have always imagined ourselves to be the ambulance versus the hospital. We are tasked with moving people out of a dire situation, a life-threatening situation, into a safe or safer situation, wherein then we can attach them to resources and community partners who will provide for their needs. And relative to the mental health care concerns, these would be healthcare providers, for example, who can provide psychological support. Many of our CIs, we call them case individuals, contend with substance abuse. Many are HIV positive. Many have a number of physical concerns, and we connect with them with healthcare providers who provide for them physically and mentally, as well legal service providers. We're in contact with providers of safe housing and temporary shelters around the world. Other LGBTQI plus organizations who do a number of things. Human rights advocates locally, internationally, private sponsorship entities. And here again, we're talking families, we're talking faith groups, corporations, any entity that wants to be involved with the safe passage of queer people, and national governments around the world. In addition, we're a global advocacy leader. So here in Canada, we're a member of the Dignity Network, and this would be a consortium of queer organizations who fight for dignity in the workplace, in academic institutions, in healthcare, in law, in the halls of government. And a lot of what they do has to do with the mobility of queer people, and particularly queer refugees as well. We are the only organization, and this was just announced 2 weeks ago, actually. We're the only organization besides the UN to enjoy a referral relationship with the Canadian government. So the way we've done our work to date is, we're able to refer very specific individual applicants for asylum to the Canadian government. And in a piecemeal basis, they go through each application and they approve or disapprove. Overwhelmingly, we're very, very thorough in vetting our applicants before we refer them to the Canadian government. Historically, we haven't been denied. This announcement that we made 2 weeks ago was that under a new partnership with the Canadian government, we are an official referring agency, which means that in a batch basis, if you will, we can refer batches of refugees to the Canadian government, whose applications can be fast-tracked by way of the trusted relationship the government would have with Rainbow Railroad. We're also the only LGBTQI plus specific organization to referral relationship with any national government. In the United States, we're working on such a relationship, but we are right now a member of the Council for Global Equity. We provide, recurring briefings to the White House on, queer mobility and queer refugee-related data. And we're a founding partner in Welcome Corps. So Welcome Corps is a new program announced by the Biden administration, and this would be basically a supportive program for those organizations and individuals who want to do private sponsorships of individuals from around the world. We see Welcome Corps as being a real boon to the work that we do. One of the pathways of resettlement to the United States would be referring people through the government. As we all know, the government and bureaucracy can be incredibly tedious and incredibly slow. Welcome Corps, the good news of Welcome Corps is that through private sponsorships as well, it creates another pathway through which we can move refugees. And we're super excited about that. And then globally, we participate in the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. We engage directly with immigration and refugee agencies for international governments around the world. And that includes the UK, Germany, Argentina, but as well Italy and France. And we continue to increase the number of those relationships and service to the people that we assist. So, this is not a fundraising pitch, but I'll say there are various ways that you can help. One of which would be to make a donation. So we're a pretty efficient organization. 68 cents on the dollar goes straight to programming as opposed to overhead costs. And to donate, you can visit that link. But in addition to donating, getting the word out there, just keeping yourself aware of the issues that queer people deal with the world over, and particularly in life-threatening situations in areas like Afghanistan or Uganda, learn about those things, learn about the geopolitical context in which those things happen, and learn about the fact that when they happen in just what we think to be disparate parts of the world, a domino effect happens, right? One government passes these laws, one state, targets trans people with some idiot, bathroom law or something like that. It creates an inertia, but we can also create an inertia of resistance through way of your being aware and your advocacy on social media with your friends in conversation, in places of work, influencing policy and procedure in the office space. And then finally, contacting elected officials. Vote for people who, to have the best wishes and the well-being of the queer community in mind. And when they don't keep their promises to protect that community, like all Americans, or, hold them to it, hold them accountable, call them up, let them know you're not happy. If there are governments around the world with which, your, state or, federal government has partnerships, call up your elected official and tell them, to hold those partners accountable. If Uganda's misbehaving, let's stop supporting Uganda economically, politically, and in various ways. And I think in all of these ways, we can be allies, and in all of these ways, we can protect the plight of at-risk LGBTQI plus persons around the world. So I'd just like to say, through all of the work that we do, and at this point, we've been able to help over 10,000 people by way of our 6 program areas. It's often said, oh, you guys are superheroes. And what we like to say is that's absolutely not true. We don't confer worth or dignity to anyone with whom we work. What we do is we scaffold their ability to be who they come to us as. They come to us with all sorts of talents and potentials and hopes and dreams. And we simply get them to a place of being where they can safely exploit those things and make the most of them. And in that respect, they're the heroes, right? I wanted very briefly to leave you with a video of a woman named Bali. So Bali is a lesbian woman out of Pakistan that we helped. And she's got such an inspiring story. Bali, we were able to resettle from Pakistan to Canada for a brief time. she worked and decided, you know, she wanted to give back to the queer community still in Pakistan. And she returned there, and she now runs safe houses part-time out of Pakistan. So anyway, she's far more compelling than I could ever be. I'll play the video, and then after that, I think we have time, I'm not looking at a clock, for Q&A. So hopefully this plays.
My sister's doing and afterwards,
So that concludes my formal presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, I've got several, but I would certainly invite anyone else who has a question to go ahead of me. First, Enloe Wilson, thank you very much. Lots of interesting thoughts, at least I think they're interesting. So first, thank you for identifying that we have to consider the cultural lens through which we view laws and customs around the world before we feel like we completely understand them. It's important to develop kind of a balancing cultural humility along with understanding human rights. So here's my question. You noted that being gay is illegal. I believe you said just being gay alone is illegal in at least 69 countries, with 11 punishing the crime by death. And then you talked about anti-homosexuality laws, aggravated anti-homosexuality laws. That's interesting too. How can someone who is considered a criminal in their home country access you, and how do you get them out if they're criminals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So the people requesting help, for the most part, are people who aren't yet involved in the correction system or are involved in such a way that they're not yet incarcerated or locked up somewhere. So unfortunately, individuals in that situation we can't get to, right? But there are a number of individuals who are embattled simply by way of being gay, right? They still walk the streets, they still, you know, they have some mobility, but they know for them, they feel the crunch of surveillance, they feel the crunch of impending laws, of impending discrimination that is called for and in many ways protected by these laws. And they realize they can't live in the region wherein they reside. These are the people that we're able to help. And we're able to help by way of them reaching out. So almost exclusively, we help people who initiate contact with us. And, you know, people hear about us by way of word of mouth, by way of newspapers. The work that we've done in the last little while has enjoyed increased visibility across the world. Our CEO, Kamali Powell, has been featured on, you know, places like CNN, a number of sort of international media, you know, outlets. And by way of that visibility, people know about us and can reach out for help. They can do that by simply visiting our website. There's a request for help form. It's available in multiple languages, and we're always trying to increase the number of languages. But yeah, that's essentially how the contact is immediately instituted. And, you know, we use whatever we need to use to sort of respond to that. If, you know, a person reaching out to us has some mobility such that they're able to leave their country to a neighboring, safer country, oftentimes we can shuttle them out of there. We are in contact with a number of transport organizations and other on-the-ground organizations that can provide self-passage. Yeah, we are creative and we're flexible, and we respond in whatever way necessary.
Okay. So in 2018, 2020, you said you helped 500 people travel to safety, and with even more people in subsequent years. You also noted that there were 7,000 requests in 2021 and more now. Then you listed several ways that you provided access to support during the COVID-19 travel ban. So now when you help people, is it always travel related? Are you always getting them out, or are you keeping them where they are?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the emergency travel support program is still our bread and butter. It's a program that most people, you know, around which most people are requesting help when they contact us. What we're able to do since COVID, though, is triage in, I think, a more efficient way. And for a number of people, we discern that what they in fact need is not immediate emergency evacuation of a place, but perhaps they just need to move to a different part of the country, right? Or they just need connections to lawyers or doctors where they are. Yeah, and so for those people, yeah, we wouldn't move them around unless necessary. We're a bit more, how do I want to say, we're responsive to a broader complexity of the needs that that people requesting help have for us. So it's not always moving them, but it definitely is up to and including that if necessary.
So when you do move them, do they become citizens of that place? And do you move them only to Canada, US, UK, Argentina, Germany, France, or are there other countries beyond?
Yeah. So you know, I think their citizenship and their path to citizenship depends on the provisions called for by a particular jurisdiction. So in most countries, the grant of asylum gives them at least the equivalent of like a permanent resident status. In some countries, there would be, in addition to that, pathways opened up to potential citizenship. Canada, for example, is one of those countries. But yeah, and you know, and then oftentimes, you know, the wishes of the person is not to become a citizen. You know, they just want to reside in a particular area where they're not going to be stoned to death, right, for being lesbian or something like that, right? It's enough for them to claim asylum, to find themselves in a particular safer locale, gain their footing, and then they can decide where they want to be for the long term. And I think the other question that you had was where we resettle. So I think as a function of where we're located, most of our resettlements happen to be in Canada and the United States. And we find that beneficial because frankly, it's tougher to resettle some nationalities to some countries. I talked a little bit about the Afghanistan refugees, for example, because they can't get visitor visas to the United States. They have very little hope for landing there in some capacity, right? A lot easier to move them to Canada. But in addition to the United States and Canada, Western Europe, particularly the UK, Italy, Germany is a fantastic partner of ours. Australia, New Zealand, those are many areas where we resettle people. Yeah.
Okay, so is there a cost to, I think you call them case individuals? Is there a cost to them?
No, absolutely not. You know, many of these individuals, by way of the stuff that they're experiencing, just don't have financial wherewithal to pay for a plane flight, much less,
Right.
a place to live and healthcare and legal care and that sort of thing. No, so there is no cost to them. And we're able to extend the services free like that only by way of support. So, in addition to cash support, we get pro bono support by way of air miles, for example, hotel points. Again, anything necessary to assist a person given their very peculiar situation, right?
So the Afghanistan piece, I want to revisit that. You said moving people from Afghanistan to Canada, not the US, is based on the ability to secure a visitor's visa. Will the Welcome Corps thing change the ability to get folks into the US? And then what happens if the visa expires in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Welcome Corps, what the Welcome Corps will do will certainly increase the numbers greatly of people that can resettle into Canada. So as opposed to then appealing to the government as a refugee claimant, now they're able to deal with individuals through Welcome Corps. And I won't say they circumvene government, but they definitely have sponsors here who will say, we'll take on this visitor. And when they arrive here, we'll provide them, lodging for a time, financial support at a time. They become less of a burden on government when private individuals already in the States, avail some level of support to them. What it won't do, if an individual can't get a visa to land in the country, unfortunately, Welcome Corps won't help them, right? Regardless of their pathway. But for those who can acquire visas to visit the United States, Welcome Corps just kind of blows open the numbers of individuals who might be able to kind of enjoy or not enjoy, but claim asylum through that route, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what I will say in response to people who can't get visas from a given country like the United States, this is why we resettle to multiple countries. If an Afghan can't resettle to the United States, there is Canada. There are various parts of Western Europe where they can resettle, right?
Oh, you just have two more. Oh, does someone else have a question? Okay. You mentioned Uganda. There was an attack in Uganda overnight in a school, and they said it's the worst they've seen. Lots of people died. Are the people you support, keeping the age of the victims of a school attack in mind, always adults?
No, actually, we are able to lend support to minors as well to a certain degree. Oftentimes we are helping families. So people had this notion of LGBTQI plus people as always being solo. We don't have kids, we don't have partners, that sort of thing. Oftentimes we do have children through past relationships. Oftentimes we do have partners, and the requests for help are not in service only to one individual, but to entire families, many of them actually containing children, right? So yeah, so we do provide safe passage to children along with their parents. We're very cautious about assistance to minors. For example, a number of queer youth reach out to us. We're very cautious about local laws and the laws of in the countries of resettlement around youth and trafficking youth in the absence of parents and that sort of thing. It's a bit of a challenge to us. We're able to administer help or not to them on a case-by-case basis. It's always sticky, but we try to always be respectful of regional laws and certainly mores and notions of family and community and parental oversight in areas we work, where it does not come at odds with preserving the life of the people that we help. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah. And then here's my last one. Do you accept volunteers? I know you take donations, which is one way to help, but are there other ways to be involved in addition to donation?
Yeah, for like most nonprofits, volunteerism along with donor support is sort of the lifeblood of our organization. So we do a number of events around the world, mostly concentrated in North America. But there's always a need for volunteers to help staff those events. There's always a need for volunteers to help do outreach to communities of faith and corporations and other organizations that might want to hear our message and might have members and individuals who want to support it. So yeah, we use volunteers for that outreach. a number of volunteers help with third-party fundraising. So as much as we are a refugee resettlement agency, our CEO likes to say we're a fundraising agency, right? We can't do anything we do without the financial wherewithal to do it. And so a huge part of what volunteers offer is support in the way of fundraising, and availing us to networks of additional funders by way of outreach and getting the word out, constant networking, right?
All right. Those are my questions. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything to say? No, you got a thank you in the chat.
You're very welcome, Sydney.
This recording will be available in the Trust the Process area of the Canvas shell. And then Enloe Wilson, if you'd like to see it, you can certainly watch yourself speak back if you want to. Otherwise, thank everybody. Thank you all for, yes, Sydney, thank you again. Thank you all for your time and enjoy your day.
Thank you for having me.
And you got a hand clap from one person.
Thank you, AERW. Cheers.
Bye-bye.